Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot daf Vav. Because I'm heading out soon, I want to just go over the schedule for the summer. So like last summer, there's about a month that I will not be teaching on Zoom. I will be teaching. Anyone who's listening, I will be teaching every day. The Shiurim will go up. There just won't be a regular Zoom because I'll be in a different time zone. So that'll be starting on Sunday, July 24th. Okay, so starting from Sunday, July 24th, there will not be Zoom for a month. Okay, I'll be back, I think, probably start up on the 25th of August. I don't remember the exact date. I'll let you know. If you want updates about Zoom, there's a Zoom admin-only group that you should join. There, the details will, be posted exactly what day and all that. But basically, starting from July 24th to August 25th, there won't be regular Zoom classes, okay? But there will be shiurim up every morning. They'll be up earlier than usual. So if you want them up earlier, it'll be useful for you. God willing, I'll be able to continue every day and the shiurim will be posted on time. Okay, we are going to get started now with our daf. We ended in the middle of a very long question. So the question, I'm not going to go into all the details again, but the question started with a basic question. How do we view the blood of a woman coming out when her hymen is torn? Is it that the blood was kind of pulled in there and we're just making an opening and the blood's coming out? Or is it like that the blood is in her blood vessels and, we're cutting something and that's making the blood pour out? And as a result, that's basically going to affect or possibly affect, in the end, we realize it doesn't really affect whether it's forbidden to do on Shabbat or not. And then, the whole question started with, Shabbat. Can they have relations for the first time on Friday night? Because if we view it as a pool, then it doesn't seem to be forbidden. If we view it as it's inside her body and we're basically causing an injury that causes the blood to come out, then it would be forbidden so as not to intentionally cause her to bleed, which would be a problem. Then we had a whole discussion within each one. How does this relate? And if you recall, I said at the beginning of the Masechet, this is called Shas Katan, or the key to the Shas, because we already were on page, right at this point, we're still on page Hey, 3 pages, right? 4 pages. Bet Gimel Daled Hey. We've already discussed marriage. We've already discussed Avelut, and we've discussed the issue, one of the most central basic issues of Masechet Shabbat about melacha, right? On the one hand, there's what we call melacha machshev. It has to be created melacha. That means you have to have intended to do it. What if you didn't intend to do the melacha, but it happened anyway? What if it's destructive? What if it's, right? It has to be a productive act, like the way they built the Mishna, rather than something destructive. So there's very basic machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon about these issues. And therefore, the question was, well, who do we hold by and on what issue? On the Kalkel, where Rabbi Yehuda says it's actually exempt, whereas Rabbi Shimon says it's obligate. To mitkaven, Rabbi Shimon exempts, so Rabbi Yehuda forbids. So big debate about, many different options about what exactly is going on. To which the Gemara answers a very confusing answer, right? Again, you have to remember, we already had this Breita that said no, but apparently it wasn't so clear that was the only opinion. Bivei Rav Amram, now on the first line of our daf, in the house of Rav, they said, Rav Sharei Ushmuel Asar. They said, Rav permits and Shmuel forbids. However, Ben Harda, which is where Shmuel had a yeshiva, Amre Rav Asar Ushmuel Shar. The exact opposite. Who permitted, who forbade, we don't know. Okay, 2 different versions. To which Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, okay, if you want to remember, this is just a mnemonic. Often they give these cute mnemonics. V'simanech, how do you remember where they said who says what? Very easy to remember. Elu mekilin latzman ve'elu mekilin latzman. As long as you remember that Nehardiyah was where Shmuel was, then it's very easy. In the house of Rav, they said Rav permitted. In Nehardiyah, which was the house of Shmuel, Shmuel permitted. And that's why they say each one said that their own rabbi permitted it. Okay, this doesn't explain why. It's not that they were each trying to say we should permit it. It was more just a mnemonic of how to remember who said what. So now we're going to go along the lines that Rav permits and Shmuel forbade. Okay, the house of Rav, their approach, and we're going to ask a question on Rav according to that, and then we're going to ask a question on Shmuel according to that. For Rav Sharei, does Rav really permit? How could Rav permit? Now, at this point, you have to realize one important thing before we go on. At this point, the Gemara is kind of ignoring part of the whole issue of makalkel at the end of the sugya that basically said we can flip everything on its head. And they're focusing mainly on the davar she'einu mitkaven machloket, and basically saying that even if you would say it was forbidden, you could claim it was a davar she'einu mitkaven, right? And then that you weren't intending to make a chabura, right? And then it would be, or you weren't intending to make a petach, right? That was also, right? So do we say, right? L'damu tzarichu petach mimei lakate. It's that you weren't intending to make an opening. And then, right, that would be a davar she'einu mitkaven. Now, again, what do we say there? Rabbi Shimon says it's okay. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says davar she'einu mitkaven is forbidden in any case. Doesn't matter that you weren't intending to make an opening. So they asked the following question. How could Rav, right, and again, then we said, even if you say it's davar she'einu mitkaven and it's forbidden, you could still say it's makalkel. It's destroying rather than creating. But ignore that for right now, okay? So Rav permits, wait a minute. The Hama of Shimi bar Chizkiah Mishmei to Rav. We're going to bring a Mishna now. That's not a Mishna, a statement of Rav Shimi bar Chizkiah that says, Hymen suchraya diniziata asur lahaduka b'yom tov. Okay? Rav Shimi bar Chizkiah says, in the name of Rav. So clearly Rav held this one. That if you have, if you remember what this is, right, it's hard to get the words mesuchraya diniziata, but you have a barrel with a hole in it. And what do? You stop it up using a cloth, like a torn clothing or something. You can't do that because what happens when you do that? It gets wet and you squeeze it. You don't intend to squeeze it, but as you're sticking it in, you're basically squeezing it. What's the problem with squeezing? Either it's a toladav dash, which is, like squeezing lemons and things like that, where you're trying to get something out from somewhere where it's in. Again, squeezing lemons is a complicated topic. There's all different issues when it's permitted, when it's not. I'm not going to get into that, but it's a toladav dash, which is the taking out the wheat from the chaff, or it's potentially melabin. Some people say it's cleaning, because when you squeeze something out, you're actually cleaning it, right? Think of a rag and you squeeze out the dirty water, you end up cleaning the rag. So either which way, it's forbidden to do. Now, why are you putting this in? You're not putting it in because you're trying to squeeze it. You're putting it in because you want to stop up the barrel. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So this is a classic case of davar she'einu mitkaven, to which they say, if Rav forbids it, what do you see? He forbids davar she'einu mitkaven, which means, again, assuming our case is just classic davar she'einu mitkaven, without the makalkel part in it, well then, why would it be forbidden, right? Because again, you're causing her to bleed, right? You're tearing it in order to make an opening, but you're not trying to make an opening, right? We said maybe you're doing it right for your own sake or whatever it might be, not for the purposes of making an opening there, but you are making an opening, right? Which we said is either bonet or makabeh patish. Okay, putting on the final blow. So in any case, it sounds like davar she'einu mitkaven. How could Rav permit? Rav says that's forbidden. To which the Gemara says, why are you assuming that Rav holds like Rabbi Yehuda, davar she'einu mitkaven is forbidden, based on the misuchlaya diniziata, that barrel, the stopping up the barrel? Rabbi Shimon modeh. Even Rabbi Shimon will agree that it's forbidden. Because Abaye and Rava both say that even Rabbi Shimon, who permits davar she'einu mitkaven, will agree in a case, and we talked about this yesterday, if I wash my hands over the grass, I'm definitely watering the grass, which would be forbidden, because that's what we call a psik reisha v'lo yamut, which really literally means, can you cut off the head of a chicken and it won't die? Of course it'll die. You can't cut off the head of a chicken and it won't die. So you can't say, oh, I didn't mean to, right? You knew that was going to happen, even if that wasn't your intent. So basically, first question that we ask is not really a question, although in a second we're going to see it is a question. But right now, disproving Rav's, the fact that he permitted based on this case is not relevant, because you could still hold like Rabbi Shimon, davar she'einu mitkaven is permitted, and yet forbid this mesuchraya diniziata, but in our case, you would permit it. Okay. However, that doesn't really work. And maybe you'll remember this from Sechet Shabbat. Right now, we're going to say, V'ha'amal Rav Chia bar Ashi amarav, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. For Rav Hanan bar Ami amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Shimon. But wait, we have a tradition that Rav Chia bar Ashi says in the name of Rav, that we paskin like he paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. And Rav Chanan bar Ami says in the name of Shmuel, he passes like Rabbi Shimon. In other words, Rabbi Shimon, Shmuel and Rav fall into line, Rav with Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel with Rabbi Shimon. And not only that, Rav Chia bar Avi matne lo gavri. He heard straight from Rav, not like we just said a minute ago that this rabbi quoted in the name of Rav, but this person heard it directly from the mouth. Like he taught the statement that Rav Amar halachak Rabbi Yehuda without even having anyone pass down in the name of this one. He had a direct correspondence with Rav, and Rav told, that his lashon was Rav says halachak Rabbi Yehuda. So it seems very clear now. Maybe we didn't prove it from the Niziata case. It could be either way. But now we know that Rav actually holds like Rabbi Yehuda. So how could he possibly permit this case of having relations on the first night? To which they say, by the way, I see your question, Becky, about that maybe, right, not all women bleed. And it's actually a little bit tricky because certain times the Gemara seems to assume that women always bleed. And then other sugyot seem to maybe say they don't always. So it's a little bit tricky, I have to agree. Maybe there wasn't so much clarity about what exactly goes on with women, and therefore some sugyot seem to assume that women definitely bleed, even though it's not necessarily the case. So in any case, and that's a theme that's going to come up a lot because the man's going to come and say there was no blood, and we know that sometimes there isn't blood. So it's a little bit tricky, this whole thing. Okay, in any case, I'm going to put that aside right now. So they say, okay, but now we're going to say the following. So la'olam Rav, and then, so I skipped the last line, which is Rav Chia bar Avid taught it without anyone passing it down. And what he taught was Rav Amar l'chak Rabbi Yehuda, that we read, and Shmuel Amar l'chak Rabbi Shimon. Okay, he also had this direct statement of Shmuel rather than passed down by somebody else. That's a little less significant, except it just kind of strengthens it. So now the Gemara says, okay, so la'olam Rav ki Rabbi Yehuda. We are going to say the Rav holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our sugya from yesterday. If you say dam mifkab pakid, that the blood is collected, and then you're not really doing a chabura, and then what's the problem? Well, maybe you're making a petach, but a petach it's davar shena mitkaven. Davar shena mitkaven, we just said he's going to hold like Rabbi Yehuda that it's forbidden. So how could he possibly permit? Because mitkalkel hu etzel petach. He's really just, it's a destructive act. By opening, it's actually making, right? It's tearing. It's a destructive act. It's viewed as destructive, in which case he's going to hold like Rabbi Yehuda that this makalkel is exempt. That's what we saw. Rabbi Yehuda holds makalkel is exempt. That's why. So now in the end, we go back to what we would have said in the beginning, right? For some reason, the Gemara didn't see that in the beginning, but now they're going to answer that. If you say dam is chibur, if you say it's mifkab pakid, then you take away the whole issue of chabura. It's not a chabura because we don't care, right? There's no, you didn't injure. The issue was just the petach. If you hold it was chibur mechabel, then the issue is the chabura, that because the blood was in the body and you're basically you're injuring her. And then you would have to say, because again, in order to say that it's going to be forbidden, right, you're going to say mekalkel b'chaburahu. It's mekalkel, and mekalkel we hold that you would have to say it's forbidden, right? It's mekalkel b'chabura, and mekalkel is forbidden. Is permitted, right? He holds like Rabbi Yehuda that mekalkel is permitted. Okay, so either which way we're going to go by, Rabbi Yehuda holds mekalkel is permitted, and we're going to view this as mekalkel, whether it's mekalkel in a chabura or mekalkel in a petach. Either which way, it's perhaps a different melacha, but whatever melacha it is, you're not going to be obligated because it's a destructive act and not a creative act. This all comes again from melacha machshevet asrat Torah. It has to be something creative action, that like God created the world, the Mishkan was creative, and therefore not something, right? Because Shabbat is based on those two things, and therefore not relevant. It's not going to be forbidden. And that's how we get to the fact that Rav permits. Okay, even though he holds like Rabbi Shimon by davar shena mitkaven, because we basically end up somewhat neutralizing davar shena mitkaven. Now, again, if you hold davar shena mitkaven, it's forbidden. So we're going to neutralize it. Mativ Rav Chisda. Now we're going to have three sources that are going to question Shmuel according to the language that Shmuel forbids. Okay, or possibly even if Rav forbids, the first two aren't really if Rav forbids, because if Rav forbids, it's pretty clear. He holds davar shena mitkaven like Rabbi Yehuda, and then we don't have a question at all. But so let's start with our questions. Mativ Rav Chisda, this is going to be our entire daf today. Three questions on the Shmuel forbids. Rav Chisda says, brings up a Mishnah in Nidda. Okay, this Mishnah distinguishes what we now have is dam betulim. Now, forget about women who don't bleed at all. What about women who bleed a number of days? So how do we know when the blood is dam betulim, or the blood could be blood coming from the uterus, dam nidda? Okay, you have to remember, at a certain point in history, and certainly this Mishnah does not assume what we do nowadays, which is dam betulim dam betulim. I mentioned this, I think, the other day. Dam betulim is a makkah, right? It's like an injury. It's like, you have a cut and you bleed. You wouldn't be in Nidda for that. However, the halacha is nowadays that the rabbis decided to be strict with dam betulim and require the couple to separate after having relations the first time. If she sees blood, this whole question, what if she doesn't see blood? Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the halachics of it. But the question is, what if she bleeds the second time? Do they need to separate it, right? In other words, now again, in their world, in the Mishnah, there was a separation from dam betulim. The only issue is maybe it's Nidda blood, right? How do you know? You don't really know how you would know or not. So it happens the Gemara gives some examples of different types of blood, whether she bleeds when she's standing or sitting. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all that there. We'll get to it. Be'ezrat Hashem in, almost a little less than 5 years' time when we get to the end of Nidda. But the point here is that there's 3 types of women. There's women, they're going to categorize them. We're only going to talk about the first 2. There's women who, let's start with the last one, which we're not going to deal with. A woman who's already has a normal cycle or she's already menstruating. Okay, that we're going to put aside. She's in a different category for this halacha because she has more of a chance she's actually going to be menstruating and maybe the blood is menstrual blood. But we're now going to talk about 2 types of women who aren't menstruating yet. One is because she's too young. Okay, again, talking about marriage being very young, right? It's hard for us to imagine, but in those days it was actually very common. So they would get married very young, and therefore they could be married right now at an age where they're not even expected to menstruate, which was in those days was under 12. And at the age of 12, she could have reached the age of menstruating, but not yet started to menstruate. So we're now going to have a machloka beit Shammai beit Hillel about those 2 categories. Matav Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda brings this question on Shmuel. Again, according to Shmuel, who forbids, the version that came out in the house of Rav, that Shmuel was the one who forbade having relations for the first time on Friday night. So it says here, so here we have a girl who hasn't reached the age yet. She's not yet 12, and she gets married. If she continues to bleed 4 days in a row, okay, let's say they have relations Wednesday night, right? They get married Wednesday, have relations Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. All 4 nights, we assume if she bleeds, it's still dam betulim because there's really so little chance that she's already starting to menstruate. Which Rashi explains is she has to basically have relations once without bleeding. Like let's say the first 10 times she bleeds. I mean, think about it. It's a makkah. So theoretically, right, every time she has relations, it could open up the same wound. So she could bleed up to 10 times. As long as she doesn't have one time where she doesn't bleed, we're going to assume it comes from dam betulim and not dam nidda. Next case, niset. Higias manalirot. 3 lines from the bottom. Let's say she got to the age where she potentially could menstruate, but she hasn't yet started menstruating. Vinisate, and she gets married. The first night, she can have relations on multiple times the first night. Any blood she sees, we're going to assume is dam betulim. After that, already we're not. Okay, already we worry that maybe it's dam nidda and they have to separate. Ubeit Hillel omrim ad motzei Shabbat, arba'a leilot. Beit Hillel says until motzei Shabbat, 4 nights. Okay, turning now to Amud Bet, now here comes the big thing. He says 4 nights. What is that? Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. Notice Friday night is in there, and Saturday night. My lav di'ilo ba'al matzi ba'al afilu b'Shabbat. So it sounds like even if they didn't have relations, now what does it mean they didn't have relations? It seems like they did have relations each of those nights, but what they mean is, let's say he didn't go in fully. So, and therefore he didn't tear Hymen or tore it partially, but not fully. So each night, right, he can go in again. It sounds like even for the first time, because we're basically saying, even though they kind of have relations the first 2 nights, maybe it wasn't really relations. He didn't go all the way in which case on Friday night, it's as if they're having relations for the first time. It seems to include Friday night here. Not only does it say Til Motzei Shabbat, it even says 4 nights, which seems like each night is a possibility. So this seems to go against, it seems to say no problem to have relations for the first time on Friday night, even though, again, it's not exactly the first time, but it is considered really the first time because he hasn't fully torn the hymen before that. So Amar Rava lo levar mi Shabbat. Rava says it's excluding Shabbat, to which Abaye says, how could you possibly say that? Amar Abaye, Beha Motzei Shabbat arba'a leilot katani. It says until Motzei Shabbat, 4 nights. That seems very clear. We're talking about 4 nights, and we're talking about including Friday night. Ela Amar Rava. So Rava now explains it a little bit differently. Okay, Rav Chisda asked this question, and Rav Chisda clearly understood the question, the case as they didn't really have full relations yet, and that's why she keeps bleeding. Comes Rava and he says, no, kishe ba'al. No. They had full relations. So then the Gemara asks, well, ikasha ba'al, my kamashmalan. So then what's it coming to teach you if they already have relations? So they say, kamashmalan deshari lemival b'shabbat kedishmuel. It's to teach you that even though they already have relations, it's still potentially she could bleed. And this is similar. Okay, you're going to see a whole bunch of comparisons as we go on in the next few dapim about entering a woman's body, kind of like going through a door, going through a gate, going through a wall, like all these kind of analogies. And they say this is just like where Shmuel says, Pirtza de chuka, if you get to a breach in a wall and you want to squeeze through it on Shabbat, are you allowed? Mutar likanes ba b'Shabbat, af al pi shemashir tzrorot. We're assuming it's made of stone. And when you go through this very narrow opening in the wall, you might knock off some small pebbles that are, they created the wall, let's say, with all sorts of small pebbles. You might knock them out on your way, or you might just, kind of shave off some of the big stones that are there. We allow you to do that. It's okay. Now, so now what's the point is that what Shmuel is saying, and this fits perfectly with Shmuel, it's davar she'eino mitkaven, and it's not psik reisha, right? He already had relations with her the first night, and maybe even the second night. Now it's the third night. Yes, there's a potential, just like he might cause stones to be dislodged from the wall, but it's still not necessarily going to happen. And that's Shmuel. He holds like Rabbi Shimon, davar she'eino mitkaven mutal. And that's what it's coming to teach you, this Mishna, that again, according to Shmuel's reading, this Mishna is coming to teach you, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so you can be Boel on Friday night, but not b'tchila, not the first time. This is after you already have full relations. There's a chance you might cause her to bleed, but it's just a chance, and it's davar she'eino mitkaven, not psik reisha, not definitely going to happen, and therefore it's permitted. So we dealt with the first question. That was the Mishna in Nidda. Second question. Mativ Rav Yosef. This is a sugya we've seen twice already in Sukkah and in Brachot. Very famous sugya. Chatan patur mikriyat shema laila harishon ad motzei Shabbat im lo asa maaseh. A chatan is exempt. It's a very famous halacha. A chatan is exempt from kriyat shema the night of the wedding, and not only the night of the wedding, but until motzei Shabbat, meaning Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. Right? It's not everyone motzei Shabbat. It's assuming you got married on Wednesday. Im lo asa maaseh. If he didn't yet have relations with his wife, assuming they didn't have relations the first night or the second night, right? He is still exempt from kriyat shema. First of all, this whole thing exempt from kriyat shema is a whole interesting thing. We don't really hold this way anymore, partially because we don't really have kavana anymore. The issue is that he can't focus on saying shema. People in general, at a certain point, lost their ability to have proper kavana in davening. Not that this exempts you from saying, I don't need to try, but there are some halachot based on that. Also, there's a whole interesting debate about what Shema we're talking about. Are we talking about Kriyat Shema Lamita, which is only a rabbinic? Or are we talking about Shema at night only? Maybe we are talking about Shema D'Oraita, but Shema D'Oraita, Torah law is at night, once at night and once in the morning in Arvit and Shacharit. Are we talking about Arvit only because it's at night and that's when we're assuming he's going to have relations with her? Or is it also include Shacharit? There's all sorts of debates about this. In any case, let's get back to our Gemara. My love, detari debai lemival. Well, what's the issue? The issue is he's very worked up about having to have relations with her for the first time, presumably also because she's a betula. He's going to make her bleed. It's going to be uncomfortable. The whole thing gets him worked up. So if he's exempt the first, until Motzei Shabbat, that means he's exempt on Shabbat. Now, why is he exempt on Shabbat if he can't have relations on Shabbat? Right? You would have said he's exempt till Motzei Shabbat, excluding Shabbat. Doesn't say that. So Amar Abaye, lo, ditari de lo bayil. He's not tari de bayil and bival, that he needs to have relations with her tonight, that he's supposed to. Friday night. No, he's not supposed to, he's not allowed to have relations. Again, this is a question on Shmuel who said, you can't do it Friday night. So comes Abaye and says, no, we exempt him on Shabbat because he's worked up about what's going to happen after Shabbat on Saturday night. That's why we exempt him from Kriyat Shema on Shabbat. It's not that he could do the mitzvah today. It's that, right, he's bothered by something that's going to happen tomorrow. We allow him to be exempt. To which Amarle Rava, umishum tirda patur. Rava wasn't bothered if you have a mitzvah in front of you to do and you're worked up about the mitzvah. Okay, I get it. But you're worked up about a mitzvah that you're going to do tomorrow? We're going to exempt you today? That seems ridiculous. And if you're going to say that, he now asks a question, which is actually asked on in general, this tirda about Kriyat Shema and Brachot and in Sukkah, which is, you might remember this, Elameata, tavas svinato bayama chinami de patur. If he finds out on whatever, right, any day of the week, it could be, finds out that his ship is sinking, which means, right, probably it was a ship carrying all sorts of wares on it that he was planning to sell, or just the fact that he lost his ship and the ship's sinking, and he's very worked up about it. Hachanami de patur, what you're going to exempt him from Kriyat Shema, because, right, anytime I'm worked up about something, I don't have to say Kriyat Shema. V'chite machanami, and if you want to say that, Rabbi Abba bar Zavda amarav avel chaya b'chol mitzvot amoro b'torah chutz min hatefillin shenamar b'hem pe'el. It says about an avel, someone who's in mourning, who clearly their mind is on other things, they're obligated in all mitzvot. The only thing they're not obligated in is tefillin, and that's for a separate reason, because it's pe'er, and by Yechezkel, when he talks about avilut, it says you're supposed to wear, there's all these things that Yechezkel is told to do. When his wife dies, he's not going to be allowed to mourn, but we learn from there what people normally are supposed to do. And it says, keep your pe'er on. They said that must be the tefillin. Anyway, putting the tefillin issue aside, the point is that an avel has to do all the mitzvot in the Torah, in which case you see that tirda doesn't, right, being distracted by something shouldn't make a difference. So why, he says, basically, why are you saying, Abaye, Rava says to Abaye, why are you saying that distraction from having to do the Be'ilah after Shabbat is going to exempt him from Kriyat Shema on Shabbat? That seems crazy. To which Rava answers a different answer. So Abaye keeps to that answer. He doesn't seem to have a problem that we're going to exempt him because he's bothered about having to do the mitzvah after. To which Rava answers, Ela Amar Rava tonight. Happens to be it's a Tanaitic debate. And then it's very easy to answer the question on Shmuel and say, Shmuel holds by some other opinion. So again, Shmuel said, you can't do it, right? And this source seemed to indicate that you can actually have relations because you're bothered, right? We're basically saying you're bothered because you have to do the mitzvah, you're talud, you're concerned with it because you have to do the mitzvah that night, meaning that you could do it. So comes Rava and he says, it's a machloka tanaim. Tanachada, and here we're going to have one braita says, Im lo asama se b'rishon patur af b'sheni. This is a different braita. He's proving that it's machloka tanaim because we're going to quote two braitas. One says, if the topic here is the exemption from shema. It says very simply, Im lo asama se b'rishon, if you didn't sleep with your wife on Wednesday night, patur af b'sheni, you're exempt even on Thursday. Bisheni, on Thursday, if you didn't do it, patur af b'shlishi, you're exempt even on Friday night. What does that show? That clearly you can do the Be'ilah for the first time on Friday night. V'tanya idach, there's another braita that says, Rishon v'sheni patur, the first night and the second night, you're exempt for Kriyat Shema, shlishi chayav, and the third night, you're obligated in Kriyat Shema because the assumption is you can't have relations. So there you have machloka tanaim. So again, Abaye answered one way, and said, this is because you're torud, because you still haven't done the mitzvah. Therefore, we're going to exempt you from Shema even on Friday night, even though you can't have relations Friday night. And versus Rava, who says it's actually a Tanaitic debate, and that's why it's not a question on Shmuel. And now the Gemara continues on this line and says, by the way, we have another source that shows this. V'hanei t'nai ki hanei t'nai. Those two braitot that we saw each line up with a different opinion in this one braita. Titanya, hakoneseta betula lo yiv'ol b'tchila b'Shabbat. Again, those braitas we're talking about the exemption of the chatan from Shema, which is what we're basically saying is directly correlated to this machloket about whether you can have relations with your wife. A man can have relations with his wife on the the first night on Friday night. Hakones taptula lo yiv'ol b'tchila b'Shabbat. So the first opinion says you can't have relations with her on Shabbat for the first time. But the rabbis permit. Here you see a big opinion, right? It's even said in the name of the rabbis that this is permitted. To which the Gemara says, Man chachamim. Who is this chachamim? Who are they? Who says this? So they say, Amar Rabbi Shimon. Okay, why is Rabbi Shimon? Da'amal davar she'en mitkaven mutar. Obviously, this holds by Rabbi Shimon. Okay, this maybe goes back to, right? Maybe they're saying that maybe she won't necessarily bleed, right? You know, it's davar she'en mitkaven. It doesn't mean to cause her to bleed. So Amar Abaye v'hamodu Rabbi Shimon p'sik reisha v'lo yamut. So Abaye says, but isn't it a p'sik reisha? Isn't it clear that she's going to bleed? To which the Gemara answers, not necessarily. And here they answer not necessarily in a bit of a strange manner. I have to admit, I don't know exactly what they're referring to. And this comes up later also in our Masechet and a few more dapim. It says here, Amar le lo, Rava answers him, because basically Abaye is questioning Rava. How could you possibly say this? That this is the same machloket and that these rabbis permit like Rabbi Shimon, like Shmuel. You know, Shmuel goes by that. Amar le lo kahalalu bavli'in she'em bikim b'hataya. Those people, those Tanaim, were not like us, the Bavliim. Us Bavliim don't know how to go in b'hataya, meaning on an angle or something, okay? Which means there's some way that you can have relations on the first night without causing her to bleed, and it seems like there was a way people knew how to do this, okay? So not like these Bavliim that aren't bikim b'hataya, they don't know how to do this. Elayesh bikim b'hataya, there's people who know how to do it on an angle in a way they won't cause her to bleed, and that's why chachamim mitirim, because of the bikiim. So he says to him, Im ken tored lama. So then why, right? If they all know, now here again, it makes an assumption. We never really understood what exact element is what's bothering this chatan. Because of that, he gets an exemption. So now they say it's obviously he's worried about making her bleed. So if they're bikiim, then tored lama. What's the tirdah for? So we say, l'she'eno baki, right? It's for those who don't know how to. So now all of a sudden we're limiting this exemption. The exemption for kriyat shema is only for those who don't know how to go in without causing the woman to bleed. So then they say, if that's the case, yomru baki mutal she'eno baki asul. Well, then it should distinguish between those who know and those who don't know. To which he answers, rov biki in him. Okay? Most people are biki'im, in which case it's not an issue. Okay, so now we've neutralized a bunch of things, right? The tircha is neutralized because most people are biki'im, and the issue of making her bleed is somewhat neutralized, and the whole bi'ila b'Shabbat seems to be fine because of that. Okay, so again, this was all according to Rav, who said, who are these chachamim? These chachamim, he tried to say it's Rabbi Shimon, and Abaye basically said, no, right, how could you say it's Rabbi Shimon? To which Rava had to answer, well, maybe it's just that we're not expecting her to bleed at all. Okay, forget about it. You say it's a p'sik reisha. We expect her not to believe at all because there's people who know how to do this properly, and most people in those days knew. So Amarle Rava bar Rav Hanan Abaye. So now Rava bar Hanan says to Abaye, Elame'ata shushbenin lama mapa lama. According to this, why do you need shushbenin and why do you need a mapa? What is this? We're going to learn more about this on Daf Yud Bet, which is that they would have, okay, you can read in Rashi if you want, Shushbenin Lama, the first wide line in Rashi. Since we just established that there are people who are experts in having relations without blood, they bring up a bright hand, Daf Yud Bet, that says, they had two people in charge, one for him, one for her. To basically serve them. What does it mean they serve them? We're going to get to this whole thing about tanat betulim, and we talked about it a little already, about this concern. And now we see that they each have somebody in charge of them to make sure. What to make sure? To make sure that she doesn't pull out a different sheet and say, look, here's blood stains, and claim that it was the sheet they used. He doesn't wash out the blood spot and then try to claim that it was a clean sheet. So if most people are biki'im and they don't bleed in general, then what do we need this whole thing for? So that's a really good question. That thing is instituted only in the case where there is blood and we're worried that he's going to make it disappear and try to claim that she's lying about it. So basically, we're limiting the relevance of that it's not going to be in every case. It's not going to be useful in every case. It's only going to be useful in a case where he's not baki. He goes in, there is blood, and he tries to hide it. And that's why they have the shushbanit. It doesn't much explain her point, about if she's going to claim there was blood and there wasn't, why she needs someone. Anyway, we've answered that question. Okay, again, we had the source. Let's just to review. We had the second source Rav Yosef brought about the Hatam being patur from Kriyat Shema. In the end, right, Abaye tried to say that it's tirda about what's going to happen after Shabbat, and it doesn't prove anything that you can do it on Shabbat, and that's the answer to Rabbi Shimon. And Rava says it's a debate among Tanaim. Okay, now, third and last question. Mativ Rabbi Ami. Hamapis morsa b'Shabbat im la'asot lapet chayav v'im lotzi mimena lecha patur. If somebody wants to pop a pimple, something that has pus inside, if you're trying to make an opening, then you're liable. Because again, you're trying to make an opening. This is similar to what we talked about before. But if it's just that the pressure's too, the pus is pushing at it and you want to get the pus out, then it's patur. Not only is it patur, it's one of those few, if you remember, Masechet Shabbat, another good review. Patur usually means you're exempt on a Torah level, but you're obligated on a rabbinic level. It's still forbidden by rabbinic. This is one of the three that's patur umutal. It's even permitted entirely to do it. So why is that different from here? That here we basically say, right, if you're doing it to get the blood out, it will be forbidden, right? Again, depending on, right, according to this, we're basically, this is a question on Shmuel again, or it could actually be Rav, if you say it's forbidden to do B'ilah the first time on Shabbat. So why would it be forbidden? This is no different from Mapis Morsa. Again, it depends what you hold, right? So they say, Hatam pakid va'akir, hacha pakid v'lo akir. Even if you view the blood as a pool of blood and you're basically just making an opening to let the blood out, and then assuming that you're not doing it to make the opening, you're doing it just to to get the blood out, or for some other reason, right? But you're not, or for hana'at atzmo, for your own pleasure, but not necessarily to make an opening. So why is it different from this mapis morsa, which is permitted? And why is this forbidden according to the one who forbids? So they say, even though we kind of had two options, either it's in your body and then you're cutting it and you're making a chabura, and then it would be, chabura, or it's a pool and you're just kind of opening and letting it out. Even that opening and letting it out, assuming you go by that, is different from letting pus out, because the blood is different than the pus. Why is that? Hatam pakid va'akir, hacha pakid v'lo akir. There's a difference in how it is in your body. We're going to assume that the pus is like an external thing that's not connected to your body at all. It's just there and you just take it out. It's disconnected from your body. It happens to be in your body right now, but it's not connected at all to your body. The blood, even if you view it as a pool of blood that's kind of in her body and we're letting it out, it's still blood that's connected somewhat to her body. It might not be, as connected as the other opinion said, but it is somewhat connected to her body. And that's why we're not going to, the one who forbids it because he views it as, right, as connected with the body. And that's why, right, it's pakid v'lo akir. It's not uprooted entirely from the body, and therefore he'll view it as a problem. Okay, so what we did today, it's a very simple structure. We had two versions of what Rav and Shmuel said to answer this question. Okay, can you do B'ilah on Shabbat for the first time? We brought two different versions. Then we kind of went with one version that Rav permits and Shmuel forbids, and we started asking questions on it. We asked about Rav, how does this fit in with davar she'eino mitkaven? We basically said, because he holds makalkel. And then we had, what does Shmuel do with the following three sources that all seem to permit when he forbids? And we answered each one in its own way. And that's it for today's daf. We'll continue tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.